The sun's rays were breaking through the dusty windows of a small bar located in the old part of town. The heavy atmosphere of the place was complemented by the smell of cheap cigarettes and last night's beer. Two brothers, Liam and Nicholas King, were sitting at one of the tables in the back, their faces reflecting fatigue and tension, as if they had been under pressure for a long time. Liam, the older of the brothers, looked exhausted, but his eyes retained a gleam that indicated determination. He wore a well-tailored, if slightly worn, suit. Nicholas, the younger man, wore a plain shirt and jeans, which emphasized his more relaxed but less confident style. He was nervously twirling his beer glass in his hands, throwing cursory glances at Liam, who was trying to convince him of his plan. "We have to do this," Liam said, leaning closer. "This isn't just a robbery. This is taking back what's ours." "Your father's store?" Nicholas replied, his voice breaking with doubt. "Do you hear how that sounds? We're talking about our parents, our mom. It's their business, Liam. They trust us." Liam nervously adjusted the sleeves of his jacket. He knew it would sound strange, but he had no other choice. His debts were piling up and time was running out. People who demanded money were not prone to patience or compromise. "That's why it's perfect," Liam continued, looking his brother straight in the eye. "No stranger could even get in without leaving a trace. We know the security system. We know when no one is there. I've thought of everything." Nicholas looked away and looked out the window. He seemed to be looking for some kind of answer in this landscape. His face expressed a struggle between conscience and despair. His own situation was not better. Small debts, unsuccessful attempts to find a stable job, constant dependence on Liam's support. "What if something goes wrong?" he finally asked. "What if someone comes? What if Mom is there?" Liam leaned closer, his voice almost a whisper. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen. Mom only works on weekdays. The store is empty on Saturday mornings. You know that. David will fake a robbery, and we'll take only what we need. No one will get hurt. It will be a one-time thing, and all our problems will disappear." David's name made Nicholas look at his brother again. He had never trusted David, Liam's friend, who was always a risk-taker and not shy about breaking the law. But it seemed that Liam had no other options. "Once and for all?" Nicholas asked again, as if trying to convince himself. Liam nodded and smiled, his eyes filled with relief. "Yes, that's right. Once and for all." Nicholas looked at his brother for a long time and then nodded slowly. He could feel the weight of responsibility falling on his shoulders, but he couldn't stop himself. Liam was right. They were on the brink. And this seemed like their last chance to escape. Saturday morning greeted the city with a fog that hung over the streets, muffling sounds and hiding the outlines of buildings. The King family store, located in a quiet neighborhood, looked serene. The large display cases with sparkling jewelry seemed like an invitation to luxury. But for Liam and Nicholas, this day was not about beauty or wealth. Nicholas sat in an old sedan parked 2 blocks away from the store. His fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The time on his phone was 8:45. Liam said the surgery would start at 9, and every minute of waiting felt like an eternity. At this time, Liam was already at the store. As the eldest son, he had access to the keys and the security system. He stood in front of the alarm panel, entering the code. His hands were shaking a little, but he tried to concentrate. The plan was simple: disable the system, signal David, and everything should go smoothly. David, dressed in a black jacket and mask, stood in an alley nearby. He was holding a duffel bag with ropes, a gun, and a few tools. He wasn't a professional criminal, but his eyes shone with excitement. He loved risk, even if he didn't realize how dangerous it could be. At 9 o'clock, Liam pressed the button on his phone that would signal David that it was time to start. David walked out of the alley and quickly headed for the store. Everything was going according to plan. Inside, the store was empty. The shelves of jewelry shone under the soft light, and David couldn't help but stare at the diamonds, which seemed almost magical. But he had to stick to the script, look professional and act fast. "Hands up!" David shouted loudly, even though there was only Liam in the room pretending to be a salesman. But suddenly everything went wrong. The door opened and Grace King, their mother, walked into the store. She never came in on Saturdays, but this time she decided to make an exception to finish the inventory. "Liam? What's going on here?" she asked, stopping in the doorway. David turned around, his hand with the gun raised automatically. Panic gripped him, and in that moment, time seemed to stand still. Grace saw the mask and the weapon, and her face froze with horror. "Don't move!" David shouted, but his voice broke. Grace took a step back, and the gun accidentally went off. The shot sounded like thunder in the silence. Nicholas, who was waiting in the car, heard the sound of a siren suddenly going off. He jumped out of the car and ran to the store, his heart pounding in his chest. When he entered, he saw a scene he would never forget: his mother lying on the floor, motionless. Liam stood by, pale as a ghost. David lowered the gun and froze, unable to believe what had just happened. "What have you done?" Nicholas screamed, running to his mother. He leaned over her, but her eyes were already empty. The siren continued to break the silence. Liam tried to act. "We have to get out of here," he said, grabbing David's arm. But Nicholas remained by his mother's body, his hands shaking and his eyes filling with tears. "This was not part of the plan," he whispered. David ran for the door, and Liam pulled Nicholas with him. They ran out of the store, leaving behind only confusion and tragedy. The distant sounds of police sirens could already be heard outside. Their perfect plan had turned into a disaster that would change their lives forever. Liam's small apartment, which used to be a refuge for him, had now turned into a cage of tension and hopelessness. The curtains were drawn tightly, muffling the light of the morning. Liam, Nicholas, and David were sitting in the living room, but there was an invisible barrier of mistrust and fear between them. Nicholas sat on the couch, clutching his head with his hands. His thoughts revolved around what had happened a few hours ago. He couldn't shake the image of his mother lying motionless on the floor of the store and the sound of a gunshot that broke the silence. Tears rolled down his face, but he did not try to wipe them away. His voice was quiet and broken when he finally spoke. "It was my mom. Our mom. How could we have come to this?" Liam stood by the window, pulling back the curtain to get a glimpse of the street. His gaze was cold and focused, but inside he was torn by panic. He knew that their plan had fallen apart in the worst possible way. He knew that the police had already started an investigation. But, as always, he tried to keep his cool. "We can't lose control," Liam said, keeping his eyes on the street. "If we start to panic, things will get worse. We need to think." "Think." Nicholas interrupted him sharply, getting up from the couch. We killed her. Do you realize what you've done? This was all your plan." Liam turned to his brother, his eyes glistening with tension. "It was our plan, Nick. You went along with it. You sat in the car and waited for it to be over. Don't put the blame on me now." David, who was still pacing the room nervously, stopped abruptly. "That's enough," he exclaimed, raising his hands. "But now is not the time to quarrel. The police are already looking for us. You heard the sirens as we ran out. We have to figure out what to do next." His words hung in the air. Nicholas looked at David with disgust. "You fired that shot," he said, pointing at him. "You brought that gun. This is all on your conscience." David frowned and replied harshly, "It was an accident. I didn't mean to do it. I've never fired a gun before. Do you think it's easy for me? Do you think I sleep well after what happened?" Liam raised his hand to stop them. "That's enough. This is not the time to blame each other. We need to decide what to do next. If the police find us, we'll all be held accountable." Everyone fell silent. Each of them knew that Liam was right, but the guilt and fear seemed unbearable. Nicholas sat back down on the couch with his head down. David walked over to the table and poured himself a glass of water, although his hands were shaking so badly that some of it spilled. "We need to disappear for a while," Liam said. "I have a place where we can hide out. The police don't know who we are yet, but it's only a matter of time." "What about the store?" Nicholas asked, looking up. "They'll find the cameras. They'll see us. They'll find the car." Liam tried to stay calm. "The cameras on the street might have caught something, but we left no trace inside, except—" He stopped talking. Everyone knew what he meant: their mother's body. No one wanted to say it out loud. "We can't fix this," Liam said after a pause, "but we can buy time. Until the police figure out who we are, we have to be prepared for anything." Nicholas didn't answer. His heart was torn between the desire to give up and the feeling that running away would only make their guilt worse. David, meanwhile, was silently looking at his glass, as if trying to find answers to his questions in the water's reflection. Their plan, which had seemed so simple, had turned into a nightmare, and neither of them knew how to get out of it. In the small town, the news of the jewelry store robbery and Grace King's death quickly became the main topic of discussion. Police began investigating the same morning the first officers arrived on the scene. The store was cordoned off with yellow tape, and dozens of curious locals stood on the sidewalk. Their faces expressed a mixture of curiosity and fear. Detective Elisa Garrett, a seasoned investigator with years of experience, took control of the case. She was known for her ability to pick up on details that others might have missed. Her partner, the young and energetic detective Marcus Lane, tried to keep up with her pace. "What do we have?" Eliza asked as she entered the store, her eyes immediately falling on the shattered glass and bloodstains near the cash register. "The cameras captured a masked man," the officer on the scene replied, "but there's something interesting. One of the cameras on the street captured a car parked nearby. The license plates are not clearly visible, but this is our lead." Eliza leaned over, examining the wreckage. "This shot," she said, pointing to the floor. "It was made at very close range. It wasn't just an accident." The criminal was panicking. She walked over to the cash register, surveying the area where Grace's body lay. "Grace King wasn't supposed to be here," Elisa added. "That also changes the dynamic. Maybe they weren't expecting her to be here. We need to find out who knew about her schedule." Marcus came over with a tablet in his hand. "We have footage from the cameras in the neighboring stores. This car here looks like an old sedan. We'll send the images for analysis to clarify the model and possibly find the owner." Eliza nodded. "Good. Now let's see if there are any traces in the store. Fingerprints, DNA, anything that might lead us to these people." The forensics team carefully examined the premises. There were no fingerprints on the jewelry shelves, but there were prints on the handle of the door leading to the service room that belonged to Liam. They were transferred to the database for verification. At the same time, the police began interviewing residents of the neighborhood. One of the neighbors said he had seen two men who had been frequently appearing near the store in recent days. They seemed suspicious to him, but he didn't pay much attention to it until the robbery. "What do we have so far?" Elisa asked at the end of the day as she reviewed the report. Marcus opened his tablet. "We have video from the cameras, fingerprints, presumably belonging to someone in the King family, and a description of the car. In addition, neighbors mentioned two men who looked like brothers." Eliza leaned back and thought. "Something doesn't add up in this case," she said. "If it's just a robbery, why does it look like it's family? Why did they choose this store, knowing it belonged to someone close to them?" Marcus nodded. "Maybe it was personal, or they knew how the security system worked." Eliza frowned. "We'll find out. Check all the contacts of the store owners in recent months, and focus on who had access to the keys and the alarm system. We only have a few days before they get away." The next morning, the results of the fingerprint analysis came back. One of them belonged to Liam King. This discovery was the first clue. Eliza realized that the investigation was leading directly to the family, and now she had to find out who else was involved. The night was dark, and the streets of the city were oppressively quiet. In Liam's apartment, the tension was almost palpable. Liam and Nicholas were sitting at the kitchen table, and David, their accomplice, was nervously pacing the room, seemingly searching for a way out of a situation that had become unbearable. The police investigation was moving quickly, and every hour brought the moment of discovery closer. "We have to do something," Nicholas said, breaking the silence. His voice was shaky and his eyes were red from insomnia and stress. "We can't just wait for them to come after us." Liam looked at his brother, his face tense, but he tried to remain calm. "Do you think I don't realize we're in a dead end?" he said. "But if we go to the police now, it'll be the end of us. We will all go to jail for this." David, who had been silent until now, stopped and turned to them. "Maybe we should just disappear. We have time. We can get away before they find out everything." Nicholas stood up abruptly from his chair. "Disappear? And then what?" Live the rest of our lives in fear of being found one day? That's not an option, David. It's just delaying the inevitable. At that moment, Liam's phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen. He hesitated, but eventually answered it. "Liam King," a woman's voice said. It was Detective Eliza Garrett. "Yeah, it's me," Liam replied, trying to stay calm. "We need to talk." "You know what this is about," she said. "We already know you were in the store that day. And we know who else was with you. If you come to the station voluntarily, it could affect your sentence." Liam realized this was their last chance. He put the phone down on the table and looked at Nicholas and David. "They know," he said. "We have no choice. We have to surrender." Nicholas looked like he was about to explode with emotion, but he nodded. His face expressed despair, but also relief. David sniffled nervously but said nothing. Liam, Nicholas, and David showed up at the station the next morning. Eliza Garrett greeted them with a cold but professional look. She immediately began the interrogation. "We know this was your plan, Liam," she said, "and we know your mother was there by accident. But an accident does not absolve you of responsibility." Liam remained silent, his eyes fixed on the table in front of him. He knew that any word could be used against him. Nicholas could not stand it and began to speak. "This was all a mistake," he said. "We never meant for anyone to get hurt. Mom shouldn't have been there. It was all—" Eliza stopped him with a gesture. "I understand that. But now you'd better come clean. We already know about the gun, the alarm, the car. We have the security footage. The only thing left is to hear your side of the story." David, who was interrogated separately, tried to deflect blame by saying that he was only following Liam's instructions. This further complicated the situation for his older brother. The trial took place in a large courtroom filled with tension. Liam, Nicholas, and David were sitting in the dock, their faces pale and their gazes downward, avoiding eye contact with the witnesses or the judge. In the front row sat their father, who looked broken. His face expressed pain and fatigue, as if he had aged 10 years in the past few months. The hearing began with a speech by the prosecutor. His words were cold and clear, and he recounted the events of that fateful Saturday, referring to the evidence: the surveillance footage, Liam's fingerprints found in the store, and the testimony of neighbors who had seen the old sedan near the crime scene. The prosecutor also emphasized that this was not just a crime, but a betrayal of family trust. Liam King organized the crime using his knowledge of the store's opening hours and security system. He enlisted his brother Nicholas and his accomplice David to carry out his plan, the prosecutor said, his voice clear and emotionless. But their plan ended in a tragedy that has destroyed their family forever. Liam's lawyer spoke next, trying to mitigate the sentence, referring to the psychological pressure and debt problems that had forced his client to take such a desperate step. Liam King is not a violent criminal. He made a mistake that cost his family a lot of money. But this crime was not committed with the intention of harming his mother or anyone else. It was an accident that got out of hand, the lawyer said, concluding his speech. During the hearing, the court called witnesses. One of them was Detective Eliza Garrett, who investigated the case. Her testimony was detailed and professional. She described how the team of investigators established the involvement of the brothers and David, who left behind enough evidence to build a clear picture of the crime. The last witness was their father. His voice trembled as he spoke of the day he lost his wife and his trust in his sons. "Grace was the best person I've ever known," he said, holding back tears. "I can't understand how my own children could do this. But despite this, I ask the court to be merciful. Grace has always believed in forgiveness, and I want to believe in it too." When the judge began to read the verdict, the room held its breath. "Liam King, you have been found guilty of organizing the crime that led to the death of Grace King. You have been sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of a review in 10 years. Liam did not look up, accepting the verdict in silence. His hands were shaking, but he did not say a word. "Nicholas King, you have been found guilty of being an accessory to robbery. You have been sentenced to 8 years in prison, to be reviewed after 6 years. Nicholas began to cry, but tried to hide it by lowering his head. "David Rawson, you have been found guilty of manslaughter and participating in the organization of a robbery. You have been sentenced to 12 years in prison, to be reviewed after 9 years. David clenched his fists but remained silent. When the judge finished, Silence filled the courtroom. Liam and Nicholas' father got up and left without even looking at his sons. Liam looked at his father one last time and whispered, "Forgive us." But he knew that forgiveness would be impossible. He couldn't take it anymore. As the guards began to take the convicts out of the courtroom, Liam turned to his brother and said quietly, "We did this together, and together we will answer for it." But Nicholas did not answer. He knew those words no longer mattered. Their family was broken, and the atonement had not even begun.